Halo Infinite feels unfinished. Now, before you start typing a comment telling me that it's just a test flight, yes, I am aware. I know. The game is by definition unfinished. When I say it feels unfinished, what I mean is this does not feel like a game that is ready to come out in 3 months. In its current state, Halo Infinite, for me anyway, can best be described as a frustrating experience. I want to like this game, but it seems like it's doing everything in its power to make that as difficult as possible. First things first, the menu UI. It's a bit strange to navigate in some respects. First off, selecting different armor customizations and skins requires you to scroll through a horizontal list with no clear order to it. Why we don't just have the same menu layout as Master Chief Collection is beyond me. Right now, this makes changing your armor or previewing different pieces feel extremely clunky and generally hard to use. Also, you can't rotate your player model when previewing armor, and this is bad for obvious reasons. As far as settings go, there are a lot, and I do mean a lot of them. While I appreciate the dedication to accessibility that is on offer here, I can't help but feel like there might be a better way to organize things than to just lump them all into one long list. It makes it difficult to find any one specific option when you want to change it. Perhaps a better way to go about this would be to have multiple submenus or collapsible lists within each settings tab. As far as video settings go, the absence of a dedicated full screen option is kind of bizarre. I don't see any reason why not to have this. While on the topic of changing settings, there were 2 issues that I noticed when it came to actually just doing keybinds. Firstly, there does not appear to be a way to completely unbind an action. By default, there are 2 keybinds, for example, for throw grenades, and I wanted to get rid of one of them so that it would only be on one button. I was unable to do so as it required me to put the secondary binding on another key and gave me no option to simply unbind. The second issue that I ran into was that the game did not recognize extra mouse buttons as bindable keys. In every shooter I play, I have grenades bound to mouse 5 and melee bound to mouse 4, including in Master Chief Collection. However, when I tried to bind melee to mouse 4, instead of binding the button, it kicked me back to the previous menu as if I were navigating a web page. I can think of no good reason for this to be the case, so I can only assume that this is either a bug or an oversight. One last issue I had with settings is that there doesn't appear to be any option for semi-toggle zoom. Traditionally in Halo, the way that zooming has worked is if you just click the zoom button, it will toggle, however if you hold it, it will act like you're using hold to zoom. In Infinite, there's no option to have zoom behave this way, so you have to pick one or the other. The problem this presents is that oftentimes players will need to use both. One of the key examples that I can think of is the sniper compared to the AR. With the AR, it makes more sense to have hold to zoom as you'll often only be scoped for a short period of time, and there's only one zoom level. With the sniper, however, players are going to be scoped for a longer period of time and may find more value in just being able to toggle the zoom. Additionally, due to the fact that the sniper has 2 zoom levels, I was unable to find a way to access the higher magnification on hold to zoom. This was fine for short maps with short sightlines like existed in this flight, but once Big Team Battle comes out with presumably larger maps and longer sightlines, this will become an issue. Speaking of problems, let's take a look at the customization options. As many of us feared, coatings and armor cores appear to be a complete step backward in terms of player expression and look like they're going to be monetized to hell and back. As it stands, players have very little choice in the way of what colors they want their armor to be, as it's all predetermined by skins 343 has preset. Currently, there are 2, maybe 3 ways of unlocking coatings and armor pieces. I say maybe 3 because some armors have a to be announced text under how you get them. My guess is that they'll either come from challenges, achievements, or campaign progression. Of the 2 ways that we know how we can unlock armor, the first is direct in-store purchases using credits. The store will probably look rather familiar to you if you've ever played Fortnite, but on what looks like a much smaller scale. There are only a couple of things available for purchase at any given time, and it looks like what will be available is going to change maybe from week to week. That said, there's no visible timer on when the store would reset, so that's only an assumption. In the flighting period, there were a few things on offer, such as a helmet, 2 skin packs, and XP boosters plus challenge rerolls. All of these things cost varying amounts of credits, but as of right now, we don't know the exact exchange of credits to real-world currency. Clicking on the buy credits option is non-functional in this test flight. Also for sale in the store is the second method that players would have to unlock customization options, the Battle Pass. For 250 credits, players can purchase access to the Battle Pass for a given season, which is described as containing 30 tiers of unlocks with 20 armor customizations, 2 coatings, and a pre-match pose, with an estimated 30 to 40 hours required to complete it. There are a couple of pretty big issues with this Battle Pass. First off, there doesn't appear to be any way to see what you are actually going to unlock within it before purchasing it, other than arduously scrolling through all the customization tabs in the armory. This is rather annoying, and it will only get worse as more and more seasons and thus more and more items are added to the game. Secondly, and most glaringly, is the way the pass actually progresses. In most games with a Battle Pass system, you get experience for just playing the game, winning matches, and maybe have some daily challenges that you can complete to more quickly progress. In Halo Infinite, however, the only way to progress the pass is to complete challenges. Meaning if you aren't doing the arbitrary tasks assigned to you on a given day or week, you aren't getting XP. Also, once you run out of weekly challenges to do, your XP gains are going to plummet through the floor. But not to worry, dear player, Daddy343 has come in with a solution. Just pay them more money to skip tiers and buy XP boosters and challenge rerolls. Speaking of XP boosters, these are fucking atrocious. In a system where the only way to get XP is through completing challenges, why in the world are XP boosters time-based? Timed XP boosts would make sense if you got match or medal XP, but as it stands, you could activate a booster and get literally nothing out of it if you didn't complete any challenges within that 30-minute window. Another problem presented by this challenge system is that it encourages incredibly selfish gameplay. What's this? Your teammate has a challenge to get 15 kills with the Needler? In a game where the Needler is trash? Well, have fun trying to win the game when your teammate is going 3 and 15 because his options are either use a bad weapon, get no XP, or pay money to change his challenges. As it stands, this is probably the worst progression system I've ever seen in Halo. I honestly think this is worse than Halo 5's rec packs. This is probably one of the most important things that needs changing before release as well. 343 says it isn't final, so let's hope it isn't. Back to UI stuff, the actual in-game HUD doesn't fare much better than the menus, and for a lot of the same reasons. It's incredibly congested in terms of the information that it has to convey to you. Traditionally, different HUD elements are placed in distinct areas on the screen in Halo. Usually, not always, but usually we have weapon and ammo counts to the top right, grenades to the top left, equipment either by the radar or under grenades, and score at the bottom right of the screen. The primary reason why all these HUD elements are kept separate is for ease of information access. Because the icons are all spread out, they can be large enough to convey this information at a split-second glance. In Halo Infinite, however, nearly all of this information, except for score, which is now bottom center, is shoved to the bottom right of the screen. Now, I admit this may be rather subjective, and I may get used to it in the future, but I find this change makes it harder to pick out exactly what I want to know in a given moment. It's still readable, it just takes longer. Another thing the new HUD does much worse than previous games is to convey when the player is actually taking damage, and where from. Oftentimes, I would find myself at much lower health than I thought I was at because I was not aware I was being shot at immediately due to hit indicators being incredibly subtle and easy to miss in this game. This problem is particularly exacerbated by 2 other issues this game has. Firstly, the radar range is very, very small. Halo 5 had the same issue. The 18-meter radar makes it so that you can have players in the same room as you and still not show up. Additionally, the actual UI element of the radar itself is pretty small. The second problem is that this game seems to have a pretty fast time to kill for a Halo game, even with the starter weapons, and trust me, this won't be the last time I mention those. All of this combines to give you the experience of just kind of dying sometimes without ever knowing you were in danger. Speaking of dying fast, the already fast time to kill is made worse by a rather strange change to the game's formula. Or pair of changes, I should say. As of right now, there is no collision with teammates, and there is no friendly fire. The result? Enough grenade spam to make Halo 3 big team battle matches blush, and team shooting so effective you'd have more fun solo queuing Crucible in Destiny 2. Also the occasional annoyance of having a teammate run through you and block your shot with no warning. The main reason why this is a problem is that, especially on certain maps, it really slows down the game. No sane player is going to rush into a room where the other team can toss grenades at their teammates' feet with reckless abandon, especially in a game where grenades are so powerful. The fast time to kill in this game particularly makes team shooting feel really crap to play against. In prior games, even if fighting 2v1 was a disadvantage, at least it was possible to win if you played your cards right. In this game, however, if you find yourself in a 2v1 firefight, the only way that you even have a chance is either if you A. have rockets, B, both your opponents are already low, or C, your opponents are two of the worst players on the planet. In the current state of the game, it makes it so that any match that has at least 2 coordinated players in it feel like a sweat fest, even in social modes. Generally, gameplay-wise, the game feels, well, it feels a bit off. Not in a good way, either. When I booted up the game after servers went live, I was fully prepared to spend the next 6 hours just grinding out multiplayer. I stopped after only 2 hours on the first day. The primary reason why I actually stopped playing mostly had to do with how the gunplay felt. One of, if not the most important things to get right when making a first-person shooter is gunplay. It has to feel fun, it has to feel fluid, it has to feel satisfying. Historically, Halo's had great gunplay, with one game being a glaring exception. This is especially strange coming off of Halo 5, which arguably has the most smooth gunplay out of any game in the series. At first I chalked it up to me just having to knock off some rust after having spent the last month or two not really playing that many shooters. But after putting some more time into the game over the weekend, combined with seeing similar sentiment throughout the community, I'm now under the impression that there is something wrong with the way Infinite plays. I tried the game both on controller and keyboard and mouse, and neither really ever felt right, and to be entirely honest, I can't put my finger on why. There are a couple of factors I suspect contributed to this general, vague feeling of wrongness, however. One of the most obvious and significant changes to the gunplay, and this was particularly problematic for precision weapons, is the reintroduction of bloom. Really quick, just to make sure we're all on the same page here, as I've seen endless, incorrect pedantry online over bloom versus spread, I'm going to define exactly what I'm talking about. Spread is a base area within which a bullet can land when a gun is fired. Bloom describes the expansion of this area that occurs as the weapon is fired multiple times. So, in other words, bloom is when bullet spread increases as you fire your gun. The problem this presents is one of inconsistency, which is an issue for precision weapons in particular, as they are designed with the express purpose of being, well, precise. This is why they often have very little or no base bullet spread. The primary way players are intended to combat reticle bloom is to pace their shots and fire slower. This is a problem because even if you do that, you run the risk of losing a gunfight to a player who spams their shots regardless of bloom, and they just get lucky and their bullets go where they wanted them to go. Or, worse, the increased spread caused their bullets to happen to find their way to you even though their aim was slightly off. I genuinely cannot think of a good reason for bloom to exist in this game. All it does is make precision weapons feel like shit. Another thing that seems to contribute heavily to how shit gunplay feels in this game is strafe inertia and acceleration. Inertia is very low, acceleration is very high. Just spamming AD in this game, especially on the extremely close quarters maps that made up this flight, and I'll talk about those a bit in a moment, makes it incredibly difficult to track players with any level of reliability, especially with precision weapons. This is something that felt especially awful on keyboard and mouse. On controller, it wasn't quite as bad because aim assist more or less helped keep the reticle on target, but on keyboard and mouse it felt quite shit. The removal of red reticle in PvP on PC was also a rather large annoyance. It made it difficult to judge what the actual effective range on some of my weapons were, particularly the pistol. 343 claims the reason behind it is to avoid cheats that auto-shoot when the reticle turns red, but I think handicapping an entire platform of players is a bit too much to sacrifice in pursuit of that goal. Red reticle is important, as it tells you when you're going to have increased bullet magnetism and when you won't, which can factor heavily into decision making. If you don't have it, move closer, zoom in, or swap to a different weapon. If you can't tell if you have it or not, you just have to guess. Lastly, they really should open up a third digit when it comes to setting your sensitivity for keyboard and mouse. Despite playing around with the settings quite a bit, I was unable to ever find a sensitivity that felt quite correct for me, and I had to just settle on one that was close enough. Fine-tuning sensitivity goes a long way into having good mouse feel, and I feel like I've been saying this a lot, but I can't really think of a good reason not to allow it. Also, I'm not sure if it's just me, or if this is a symptom of not having true full screen, or what, I don't know, but this game doesn't really feel as though it's using raw mouse input. It feels almost as though it's being run through some kind of filter. Again, I could be wrong, I don't really have anything to back that up, that's just how it feels. So aiming feels a bit off, but what about the guns themselves? honestly, they don't feel particularly great either. As I've already mentioned, precision weapons feel a little bit clunky, mostly probably due to bloom, but that aside, most of the map pickups just don't feel that particularly great in general. As for returning weapons, the needler, as I've already mentioned, is pretty bad. It takes too many needles to explode and the projectiles themselves move rather slowly. By the time you shot enough to kill, you're probably already dead. This iteration of the plasma pistol is probably the worst in the franchise. It actually does nothing well. It does less shield damage per shot than the pistol, and the charged shot has tracking so weak you can just outstrafe it. Most criminally though, it no longer disables vehicles with the charged shot. I can't think of a single situation where you would want to pick this up, except for maybe if you have zero ammo in both weapons. The BR is okay, I guess. It maybe fires a bit slow for my tastes, and the close quarters natures of these maps that we played this weekend didn't help either. The gravity hammer seemed to be super inconsistent and overall pretty bad. It was also entirely lacking in AoE and physics effects. Rockets are rockets, although they may need a small bump to lethal radius, as in their current state you practically need to directly hit people to kill them in one shot. The sniper is in kind of a weird spot right now. It's still a very good weapon, but it definitely feels pretty difficult to use. Harder than the Halo 1 sniper even. This might just be because we're coming off of Halo 5 and that thing practically aimed for you, but something still feels off, particularly with the hipfire. Bullets don't always seem to go exactly where they should. New weapons are a bit hit or miss as well. The shock rifle is pretty good, feels mostly reliable, and is very effective at stopping enemy vehicles. The skewer is pretty interesting. It's a bit hard to use against players on foot, but that's fine because it mostly seems like it's an anti-vehicle weapon. I like it. The commando is in a bit of a weird spot. I want to like this gun, but there are a couple problems with it. Firstly, this weapon seems to suffer the most from reticle bloom as a full auto precision weapon. When fired fully automatically, it becomes almost impossible to have your bullets land on target. So this begs a question. Why is this fully automatic? It seems like it would be much better served just being a semi-auto weapon as a DMR replacement. Speaking of weapon replacements, the shotgun in this game is just bad. It's truly awful. Its range is abysmal, and so is its damage. It theoretically is a 2-shot kill, but most of the time it'll take 3. This is a weapon that suffers from the range the maps this flight played on as well. While yes, they were largely close quarters, they weren't so close quarters that this weapon felt useful. I rarely found a good reason to use it, and rarely found anyone else that was using it either. It's just not great. In fact, I rarely found a reason to use it is a sentence that holds true for many of the new weapons. The Heatwave, the Pulse Carbine, and the Ravager don't feel like they have a place in the sandbox at all. It isn't particularly clear how or why you're meant to use these guns, or what you'd gain from using them over the AR or the pistol. On that topic, the AR and the pistol might actually be too strong as starter guns. While it is important that spawn weapons are good enough to afford people a fighting chance in a losing situation to avoid snowballing, it's also important to make sure they aren't so good that players avoid other weapons. Unfortunately, it seems like that's a problem that Infinite has. The pistol, if you are blessed by RNGesus and don't get trolled by Bloom, is actually very strong, and the AR is by far the most consistent weapon in the game right now. It has a pretty fast time to kill, a magazine large enough to be forgiving of imperfect accuracy, and has a surprisingly high effective range. While these are not necessarily bad features of a starting weapon, it poses a problem when mixed in with the rest of the sandbox, particularly in the range department. It's simply too effective at countering ranged weapons by forcing them to zoom out due to its accuracy. It's impossible to get good, consistent scoped shots with, say, the BR on a player with an AR at medium-long ranges because you can't stay scoped if they're firing at you. I think reducing the ranged accuracy of the AR would be a small change that would have a huge impact on how the game plays right now. Weapons are one thing, but they aren't all that contribute to combat flow. Movement is also incredibly important in this regard. I've already talked a bit about how strafing is probably too strong right now, but what about everything else? Well, mostly I kinda like it. While I'm still no fan of sprint in Halo, I think this game has managed to do sprint the best. It's been slowed down from Halo 5, and that combined with the removal of thrust has made it feel like you can't just run away from a losing gunfight like a get-out-of-jail-free card. I was originally on the fence about the grapple hook being added out of fear that it was just a trend-chasing feature that was tacked on, but after playing around with it, it's grown on me. It does feel like it could use just a tiny bit more range though. Nothing drastic, but oftentimes I found myself just slightly overestimating how far it would reach, so I think increasing it by another meter or two would be perfect. As for the other parts of advanced movement, I think they could use a little work. As it stands, both slide and clamber feel a little bit clunky. For starters, slide isn't affected by map geometry, it goes at a static speed, rather than being fast downhill and slow uphill. It also just generally doesn't seem that useful as a part of the player's movement kit. There was never a situation I ran into where it felt necessary in the slightest. Clamber has a bit of a twofold problem. Firstly, it's just very slow and leaves you completely vulnerable for far too long. If you clamber in front of an enemy, you die. Full stop. Secondly, almost every jump on all the maps we had access to in this flight required that you use it. It completely breaks the player's momentum when moving from place to place, and once again makes jumping into an area with enemy players a borderline suicidal action. Much like with slide, in this current state I struggle to see what clamber adds to the game that just having a higher jump height wouldn't achieve better. On the topic of maps, generally they seem to be pretty okay, with one absolutely massive exception. Recharge is fucking awful. I cannot stress enough how much I hate this map. It has zero natural flow to it, it's beyond cramped and also feels far too open at the same time, and spawns are atrocious. I often found myself spawning directly around the corner from an enemy player. This might be the worst map I've played in a Halo game, up there with the stupid teleporter map from Combat Evolved. On the upside though, the other 3 maps we got ranged from okay to good. Live Fire was probably my favorite out of the 4 maps we got, with Behemoth not too far behind. My main complaint with the latter being that it could probably use a little bit more cover on the outer area. Bazaar was a bit hit and miss for me though. It had the same problem maps like 2 Fort and Team Fortress 2 have. 2 main base areas on either end, 1 main flank route that offers safe passage to the other side, and a no man's land death zone in the middle. The majority of the action on this map takes the form of players taking pot shots at each other from base to base across mid, with the occasional skirmish on the flank. I don't think this map is bad per se, it just causes slow games. Most matches I played on this map came down to the timer. I do have one critique that concerns every single one of the maps we played on this flight though. They're too open. Even when you're inside a building, nearly every room on every map has 3 or more entrances. This makes it nearly impossible to play defensively, which tends to create problems on objective modes. Let's look at, for example, the flag room on Bazaar. In this scenario, your team all pushed out and died, taking down half the enemy team. You now have 2 players pushing you on defense. In order to try and hold them off until your team respawns, you have to cover not 2, not 3, but 5 different angles of attack. Suffice to say, you're probably fucked. While players on offense should always have a slight advantage in objective-based modes in order to avoid stalemates, the advantage shouldn't be so large that defense becomes nearly impossible. Finally, there are a couple of other things I'd like to mention before closing out that I wasn't really able to find a good place for in the rest of this diatribe. First off, BXB is back on crack. I've seen the videos, you've seen the videos, we've both probably experienced it in-game, everybody knows about it, everyone's abusing it. This is pretty clearly a bug, and although it is admittedly kind of funny, it creates bullshit levels that shouldn't even be reachable. This will almost certainly be fixed in the final release, so I didn't think it was really worth mentioning anywhere else. Player outlines kinda suck in terms of communicating information to players. I found myself having to consciously think about who was friend or foe. I'd really like a toggle to just go back to the normal red versus blue at the very least. AI voices are kind of annoying after a while. The most tolerable one that I settled on was the default one, which is kind of just a wish.com Lord Shax. Being able to turn these off would be nice. I like the inclusion of pings, but I think they could still be improved. While it is nice that you can ping locations for your teammates, it would be nice to have different types of pings available. As of right now, there is no difference between a ping that is meant to say, hey, let's go this way, or that way is dangerous, there are enemies. Pings in their current state are better than nothing, but they still have room for improvement. Audio is generally pretty good. The music is great, the sound effects team very clearly put in a lot of effort. The only major complaint that I have is that footsteps should probably be a bit louder. At the moment, it's borderline impossible to hear players running up on you. Last but not least, the post-game carnage report is vastly inferior to that of previous titles. The one in Master Chief Collection is great, I see no reason to change it from that layout. Phew, well, that was a lot of info to take in at once, but I think that covers just about everything that I possibly could have talked about. If you're still watching, I appreciate you for sticking around and would encourage you to like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you dislike it, and sub if you haven't already. We're getting close to the 1,000 sub mark, and I'm going to try and make that a goal to hit it before November. As for future stuff, I have a pretty big project that I've been working on for the better part of a month now, and I'm excited to eventually get that out to you guys. It'll be a slight departure from what I normally put on this channel, but it still fits the general format. That said, thanks once again for watching, and have a great day.